This is the Creative Market Free Goods Roundup for the week of January 19th, 2015. There are 6 different free goods this week, but they are free this week only. So if you're watching this video, any of these items look like something you might have use for, be sure to pick them up this week while they're still free. First on the list here is Hipsteria Photopack. These photos are provided in JPEG format and there's 20 in total. I've selected 5 at random here to show, and they all have a very vintage appearance, and they're called Hipsteria because you tend to see these sorts of images placed behind hipster style designs and illustrations. And as far as the size of these go, they're really large. If I go to image and then image size, you can see that they're 6,000 pixels wide by 4,000 high, so that should be plenty big for almost any print or digital application. And I'm going to go to the next option here just so you can get a look at what these are. The coloration on all these is very faded, and the settings on these are a fall natural landscape. With the nice faded color on these, I think it'll really work well when you place a design over the top, so that the design, if you make it white or something a little bit similar color to that, it'll pop really nicely in combination with these images. I'm going to zoom in on this image to 100% so you can see what the image looks like up close. The quality of the image looks very high. I'm not seeing any sort of weird digital distortion, so you can tell that these photos were taken professionally. I think they look really good up close as well as far back, which is always nice to see. And here's the last image of the bunch. It's a very nice sunset or perhaps sunrise through this grass in the foreground here. So this is just the 5 that I selected at random here, but there are 20 of these in total. The theme throughout them all is very similar to these images. They're all quite consistent in their appearance here. So if these images look like something you might have use for, be sure to pick it up this week. Next up is vector textures. So this set is provided in EPS format, so I have them open inside Adobe Illustrator here to show it. And they're all included on one page with 2 different sections. So this is the top section, and on the bottom here there's another section of different textures here. I'm going to show the top ones first. There's a fairly diverse selection of different textures on this page, but my favorite ones are this one and this one that have a wood grain kind of look to me. I think they're really cool in how they're executed, and this one in particular just has a really unique and fun texture. If I click on this one up top here and then zoom in a little bit closer, you can see that there's some paths that are kind of invisible, but they're overlapping each other. If you ever want to get rid of that, just have this selected, go to Window and then Pathfinder. Make sure your Pathfinder window is open. It's right here on my screen. And under Shape Modes in the upper left-hand corner, there's one called Unite. If you click that, it'll just unite all these overlapping paths, and it will remove quite a few of them and kind of simplify this object down a little bit. Not a big deal, but it's just something you can do if you want to simplify this just a little bit. So a lot of these textures are pretty bold in their appearance, and I think they'd work better if you kind of use them on the background of an object and then make them very tonal in their appearance, just to add a little bit of flair to whatever it is you happen to be working on. I'm just going to keep on scrolling through here so you can see the rest of them. This one right here almost reminds me of like a wave ripple pattern, so that's kind of cool. I might put this on like a blue background and make this either a slightly darker or slightly lighter blue. I think the effect might be pretty cool. Right here's a really nice and big subtle texture. I'll select it just so you can see what I'm talking about. I think textures like this work really well if you apply them over some nice thick type to kind of knock it out and give it an interesting appearance. This texture right here I think is the same texture as this one to the right. It's just knocked out on a solid background. So if you want to use this texture on a solid background, that work is already done for you. And there's a few more of them like that. There's this one right here as well as the one below it. I think this one in particular would be a little bit more handy as it's a little bit more subtle, and I think this would work pretty nicely overlaid on some stuff. I'm going to zoom in a little bit closer here so you can get a good idea of what these individual texture objects look like up close. The way the paths are behaving kind of reminds me of a live trace object, so that's probably how these were created. Not totally sure, but there's a lot of those kind of strange curves that tend to go on when you're actually live tracing stuff, but when you zoom out a little bit further, they're not noticeable in that regard. So when I apply this to something, I'd probably use it a little bit smaller so that the distress pattern still looks really natural. This texture right here reminds me of a wood grain pattern, but it's a bit more abstract. I think this would be a really strong candidate if you want to apply it to a background, kind of knock it to be very subtle and just give it a little bit of a cool appearance to whatever it is you happen to apply it on. These bottom 3 right here are all very bold. I'm not quite sure what I would use the center one on. It's just a little bit too bold for my taste, but I would use the ones on the left and the right just like I would have used this one. I'd apply them to a background, make them very tonal or very subtle, just to add a little bit more character to the project that you happen to be working on. But there's a nice and diverse selection of different vector textures here, and vector textures are always really awesome because you can make them really big or really small without worrying about losing any kind of quality. But that's it for this texture pack. These 2 once again are my favorites. I think they're really cool wood patterns that I might find myself using in the future. And if you think you'll have any use for these in the future, be sure to pick this pack up this week while it's still free. Next we have Butterfly's blogging theme. So this is a WordPress theme, and it seems very focused on a female audience. When I look at it, I really get the vibe of either home goods or crafting, that sort of stuff. So if you're looking for a really nice blog template that seems to be pretty well suited to that, this might be a really good one to check out. And also this is a very responsive blog theme, so it should look good on no matter what kind of device you happen to be using at the time. I'm just going to zoom down to the bottom here so you can see how this looks as I go through the entire thing. So at the bottom here you have Facebook, Twitter, social icons, a room for text, as well as a footer. I'm going to scroll all the way back up the top here where you can see some of the different sections included. It's a nice way to group up your blog into different sections so that when people click on decoration, that's what they can see. If you click on any post, it'll bring you to a page that has room for nice big images. There's plenty of room for type here, and also a nice spot for the author's name and description. There's a related post at the bottom, as well as a built-in comment section, which is a really nice plus here. It looks like it should be really nice and easy for people to add comments to these blog posts, and when people do that, it makes the blog feel that much more alive. So here's a few more sections here, one for fashion, as well as recipes. As you can see, this blog has plenty of room for really nice big images, which I think does a nice job of drawing people in to actually reading the type. People in general are very visually oriented when they're looking at websites on the internet. I'm going to go back up the top here. We can see a bit of the options here. So under galleries, there's a bunch of different gallery options, all for the images you use. This is a standard thumbnail gallery right here. I'm going to go to the slideshow so we can take a look at that. So the slideshow is right here. It'll naturally go through these images. It's pretty slow, but it goes through them. As well as when you hover over it here, you can see there's back and forth buttons, as well as a pause button, so people can navigate that way as well. There's this circle page, which is a bit more of an abstract take on a thumbnail gallery. It's pretty unique. I haven't seen something quite like this in the past. So that's kind of an interesting way if you want to display your work in a very different manner that might catch people's eyes. This layout's called squared tiles, where it shows a bunch of different tiled squares in slightly different sizes here. And in the bottom here we have tiled thumbs, which is actually my favorite gallery of the bunch. It does a nice job of stacking all these images in a nice confined space, but it also varies up the sizes to keep it more visually interesting. Under layouts here is just a few different options including this post. So here's different typography layouts, a really nice quotation section right there. If I go up to the top here, there's short codes. So if you want to look at the different headings and how they look, that's a nice spot to do that. And then the contact page is really straightforward here, just name, email, website, comment, as well as a little contact details section right here on the side. So I think this is a pretty nice theme. It gets the job done for sure. And like I said before, I think this works really well if you're into either crafting or home goods or even fashion. This might come in really handy. So if you're in the need for a blog theme and this looks like something that might come in handy to you, be sure to pick it up this week while it's still free. Next up is travel labels and badges. So these logos come in JPEG, Photoshop, Illustrator, as well as EPS formats. I have them open inside Adobe Photoshop here to show them, and they come in two different variations. There's 6 logos in total. One variation is like this, where they have a black background and all the main elements are white, and then the other one is essentially the inverse, so it has a white background and all the white elements will be black in that one. I'm showing the black ones in this video since it's really bold and very easy to see all the details included. And something to note with these, all the type is live and you can edit it, but they did not include font download instructions, so you're going to have to try to hunt down these different fonts that are included here. If you go into a font and then use the type tool to select it, it'll tell you the name of the font. In this case, it's Avant-Garde ITC by BT. I'm not sure if that's a free font or not. I do know ITC tends to be a paid font foundry, but if you search around online, you might be able to find it. I'm showing these inside Photoshop for that reason, because all the font's appearances look just fine inside Photoshop, where if I were to show this in Illustrator, it would actually make me have to find and download all those fonts, which I didn't feel like doing without a download list. But aside from that, there's some very cool and very unique layouts of logos here that you can choose to pick from. Like this one in particular isn't a layout that I see a lot of. It has a very unique shape to it and does a pretty cool job of adding in some nice illustration here. Here's a wax seal style badge, a little bit more common, but the execution is very well done. Here's a very typical shield badge layout that I think you could use on a ton of different stuff, whether it be a badge for even a t-shirt design. I think this would work great for that since it's nice, simple, and bold, although I would use the inverse one if you plan on putting this on a t-shirt, maybe make this one black. And this is actually my favorite logo of the bunch. It has this really cool object in the center here with the type going on a skew, as well as plenty of room for other specifics around the outside edge here. This is just a really cool layout that feels nice and balanced while being something a little bit different than what you typically see. And also included in this pack is a free paper texture background, so I'm going to zoom in a little bit closer so you can see the actual paper texture here. So I think if you went ahead and applied, for instance, the black version of these logos over this, and then maybe reduce the transparency a little bit to make the paper show through slightly, or you could even set the logo to multiply and make the color of the logo a gray or something similar, you might get some really cool effects with this paper texture. The size of this paper texture is about 2700 by 3900 pixels, so that's really nice and big for a lot of different uses. So if this comes in handy, that might be worth getting this pack just for that, if you want a cool paper texture. And the only other thing I want to note here is that at least inside Photoshop, the group names tend to be kind of random stuff like path plus path plus path, or there's a folder called group, and when you open up that folder, there's another folder called group. So you have to kind of turn on and off these layers to figure out where they are. So what I would do if I tended to use these a lot in the future, I might go through, kind of figure out where everything is and rename something like path plus path plus path. In this case, something simple like black dots, just so I could quickly access what that is in the future. But I do think these logos are very well done. There's a lot of really strong layouts here that I think you could adapt to a whole bunch of different uses. So if you think this will come in handy for you in the future, be sure to pick it up this week while it's still free. Next is Bond Pro Rough Thin, which is a font. This font is provided in TrueType font format, and I have it open inside Adobe Illustrator here to show it. And I actually had this saved in my free goods folder already, so this might have been offered in the past. I don't totally remember, but it does seem quite familiar to me. And I have a few things typed out here just to show this font. There's the lowercase examples as well as uppercase or capital examples right here, and a little cross section of all the special characters included. If I click on this and then go to type and then glyphs near the top here, you can see that there's a really wide selection of special characters included here. So if you're using a Latin language set, it probably has the special characters that you need, which is always really nice to see in fonts. I'm going to click out of this and zoom in a little bit closer on these letters so you can see the rough part of this font. So all the edges and all the different letters have really rough, jagged edges that give this a very distressed appearance. But as you can tell, it is very easy to actually read what these letters are. Sometimes really distressed fonts become quite hard to read. I don't think that's an issue at all in this case, probably because the base letters are so bold and strong that a little bit of extra distress just adds character to them and doesn't make them illegible. The capital letters in this font are actually my favorite part of this font because they're really nice and bold. They have really cool lines, and I always like really nice big display fonts that kind of give whatever it is you're working on a really nice punch. Here's the special characters that I was talking about before. There's a very nice selection of different special characters included here, even registered and copyright marks. And I did go ahead and type out free goods roundup so you can see what it looks like in a sentence. The stock kerning is actually very good, and I think that's in part because this font has a very rectangular format throughout all the capitals as well as lowercase letters. They all have a very box shape. So I think if you use this as a display font or even a little bit smaller, you won't have to really go in and kern all that much. The work should be pretty much done for you with just some small tweaks needed as you see fit. But I really enjoy this font. It's a very complete font that has a pretty cool look, especially zoomed out this far. I think the distressed edges give this font a really cool look. So if you have a project in mind where you think this might come in handy, or you think this might come in handy in the future, be sure to pick up this week while it's still free. And next we have Finches and Wren Branch Pack. The file formats for these illustrations are JPEG, EPS, as well as transparent background PNGs. I have the EPS files open in Adobe Illustrator here to show it, and these are all fantastically well done illustrations. If you take a look at this watercolor rendition of a bird, I think it really speaks for itself in terms of the quality that it has. And one cool bonus with a lot of these EPS files, all these elements are on their own layers, so if I click on this bird, I can go ahead and move that off to the side. I can move the branches independently, as well as if I just want to use this background on its own, I could go ahead and do that. So that's a little bit of an added bonus that you could rearrange or customize these quite a bit as you see fit. If I want to move this bird to this branch, I could go ahead and do that. It looks a little bit weird there, but that's fine. There's also type included with a lot of these, but this type isn't live, so you can't go in there and edit, although you could go ahead and remove that type and find another font that's kind of similar and retype that out if that's something you want to do. And also something I wanted to show quick with this file, there are some repeating backgrounds included in JPEG as well as PNG format, so I just brought one of those inside Adobe Illustrator here to show it. They repeat very nicely, and I think this looks really great. Although it is a repeat, it doesn't scream repeat to me. Like in some repeats, the repeating pattern doesn't feel too natural. It feels too rigid in its execution. That doesn't happen at all in this one to me. I think this is super well done. And I think everything in this set, but these repeating patterns especially, would work great on greeting cards or other things like that where you really want to give what you're working on a very cool handmade illustration quite easily. This would come in super handy for that, and since these are repeating patterns, you could scale them up to be as big as you need for whatever project, so they should be pretty darn versatile in that aspect. I'm going to go to the next illustration here, which is another bird. This bird and branch are one, but you could take this bird and apply it to other different illustrations inside this pack. So if I hit Control X on a PC or Command X on a Mac, I can cut that, and then I can bring it on over to this illustration right here, paste that in there, scale it down just a little bit so it's a bit more in line, and then add it to this illustration. So you could go ahead and customize these that way. As you can tell, the illustration styles all work really well together since they have a very similar appearance. Here's the next bird illustration in EPS format. It looks like it's the same bird as this one right here, just flip the other direction. And here's a different bird illustration. The bird and the berries are all one in this one once again. And do remember, you could pull just this background and use that. If you want a soft watercolory sky background, you can go ahead and use that. And here's the last one I'm going to show. It's two different birds on a branch, and these birds are totally independent. So if you want to switch their positions around, you can go ahead and do that to kind of customize this one, or even add other birds from different illustrations. If I want to bring this guy in the front, I can click on it, and then just right click, arrange, bring to front, and it should push it in front of these berries right here. And do remember, also included in this pack are the repeating background JPEGs and PNGs, as well as JPEGs and PNGs of all these different illustrations. So if you have Photoshop and you don't have Illustrator, that's certainly a way you can work as well. But all in all, this is an extremely professionally illustrated pack. I really like the illustrations of the birds, and the watercolor inside them is handled really well. If I zoom in a little bit closer here, you can tell they all have a bunch of character, and they pull off that watercolor look in vector format in a very convincing manner. So if these illustrations look like something you might have use for, I would certainly recommend picking this one up this week while they're still free. So that's it for this week's free goods, and do remember they are free this week only. So if when you watch this video, any of these items look like something you might have use for, be sure to check out the description of this video where I'll place links to each one of them. And as always, if you found this video helpful, please hit like and favorite, and if you want to see this video every week, please subscribe. This video is released every Monday to let you know it's free this week on Creative Market. Thanks for watching.